For years, Karen Hamilton ruled the HOA like a tyrant, enforcing ridiculous rules, handing out bogus fines, and trying to extend her control over everything in the neighborhood, including property that wasn't hers. I ignored her at first. I wasn't part of the HOA. Their rules didn't apply to me. But then Karen went too far. I returned home one day to find a massive, fully built HOA-branded swimming pool sitting right in the middle of my land. No permits, no warnings, no permission, just an illegally constructed pool that the HOA was charging members to use. Karen thought she could bully me into giving it up. She thought I'd either roll over or let her buy the land for pennies. She even tried to threaten me with an HOA lawyer. What she didn't know? She will fail with this. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. For years, Karen Hamilton ruled the HOA like a tyrant, enforcing ridiculous rules, handing out bogus fines, and trying to extend her control over everything in the neighborhood, including property that wasn't hers. I ignored her at first. I wasn't part of the HOA. Their rules didn't apply to me. But then Karen went too far. I returned home one day to find a massive, fully built HOA-branded swimming pool sitting right in the middle of my land. No permits, no warnings, no permission. Just an illegally constructed pool that the HOA was charging members to use. Karen thought she could bully me into giving it up. She thought I'd either roll over or let her buy the land for pennies. She even tried to threaten me with an HOA lawyer. What she didn't know? She will fail with this. Before we dive into this intense story, we have a small favor to ask. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. It's always incredible to see how far our stories reach. Thank you so much. Now let's dive in. For as long as I could remember, my family's land had been ours alone. It wasn't just some empty lot. It was history. My grandfather had bought it decades ago, long before any HOA even existed in this town. The property stretched several acres beyond the neighborhood, a peaceful place with tall trees, an old barn, and a large stretch of open grass where deer occasionally wandered through in the mornings. I had grown up here, learned to drive on these back roads, spent summers fixing up the barn with my grandfather, and eventually inherited it all when he passed. Unlike the neatly uniform, regulation-mandated houses in the HOA-controlled neighborhood next door, my land had character. It wasn't covered in chemically treated grass or lined with perfectly identical mailboxes. It was real, and that's exactly why Karen Hamilton hated it. Karen had been the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA for the last 5 years. No one actually knew how she got the position. There were no elections, no real board meetings where people could oppose her. She simply ran things as if the HOA were her personal kingdom. At first, it was just minor annoyances. Every few months, I'd receive a letter from the HOA despite not being a member. Your property is bringing down the community aesthetic. Please consider landscaping improvements. Your fence does not meet the HOA guidelines for height and material. We strongly suggest a modification. The board has voted on a proposed expansion of the HOA boundary and would love to discuss the benefits of membership. I ignored every single one. My land wasn't part of the HOA. Their rules didn't apply to me. That only made Karen more determined. She started sending HOA representatives to my property under the guise of neighborly check-ins. They weren't subtle. Clipboard-wielding, stiff-smiled enforcers taking notes on everything. My mailbox, my driveway, the color of my house. Then came the fines. They weren't legal, of course, but that didn't stop the HOA from trying. Letters arrived in my mailbox stamped with Karen's signature, demanding payment for imaginary violations. I laughed at the first few, tossed them in the trash. But when she realized I wasn't paying, she escalated. One morning, I woke up to find a freshly printed notice taped to my front door. It read, "Notice of Community Development. Dear homeowner, the Willow Creek HOA has approved an exciting new amenity for our wonderful neighborhood. A new community pool will be built to enhance our shared spaces and promote togetherness among our residents. Construction is set to begin next week. We appreciate your cooperation during this improvement process. Location of development, lot expansion #C8, adjacent to HOA park property. Best regards, Karen Hamilton, HOA president. I read it twice, then a third time, then my blood ran cold. Lot expansion #C8, that was my land. Karen wasn't just trying to find me anymore, she was stealing my property, and I had no idea just how far she was about to go. The following week, I left town for a few days for a work conference. I wasn't worried. After all, Karen's ridiculous letter meant nothing. The HOA had no authority over my land. There was no contract, no sale, no permit. So imagine my shock when I returned home and found an entire swimming pool sitting on my property. I drove down my gravel road as usual, expecting to see the open land my grandfather left me, but instead I was greeted by a massive, freshly dug and fully installed in-ground pool. I slammed my brakes. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a fully built, fully operational community pool on my land. Bright blue water, lounge chairs neatly arranged around the edges, a brand new HOA sign with a list of pool rules, even a damn lifeguard stand. And worst of all, people were swimming in it. I couldn't move for a solid minute. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. A few kids splashed in the shallow end. A group of homeowners lounged by the edge, sipping drinks. A HO-branded banner hung across the entrance gate, welcoming everyone to Willow Creek Community Pool, HOA members only. I nearly laughed at the audacity. Instead, I stepped out of my truck, boots crunching against the gravel as I walked toward the entrance. People glanced my way, but no one seemed concerned about the fact that they were standing on private property. Then I saw her, Karen, standing near the poolside, sipping lemonade like she owned the place. I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Karen!" She turned, spotting me, and her expression barely flickered. Instead, she smiled, like I was a guest at her personal pool party. "Oh, Daniel, you're back," she said cheerfully, stepping toward me. "Perfect timing. Isn't it just wonderful?" I stared at her. "There's a pool. On my land." She gave a small, amused laugh. "Oh, Daniel, don't be so dramatic. It's for the community. I told you in the letter, this is a shared investment in improving our neighborhood's amenities." I clenched my jaw. "Karen, you built a pool on my land." She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, well, technically, but that's just semantics. It was an unused space, Daniel. And since it borders the HOA park, it only made sense to expand it a little." I took a slow breath, resisting the urge to yell in the middle of the crime scene she had just created. She wasn't even trying to deny it. She had stolen my property, built a massive pool, and was charging HOA members to use it. Because that's when I noticed the sign by the entrance gate. HOA pool passes, $300 annually guest entry, $15 per day, no non-member swimming. I turned back to Karen, smiling coldly. "You're charging people to use a pool you built on my land?" She barely blinked. "It's only fair, Daniel. The HOA paid for the construction costs after all. We have to recoup the expenses somehow." I let out a slow breath. "Karen," I said, voice dangerously calm, "do you have a land deed saying this belongs to the HOA?" She hesitated. "Well, no, but do you have permits for construction?" Her lips twitched. "We technically didn't need any because it's a—" "You needed permits," I cut in. A flicker of something nervous crossed her face, but just as quickly she smoothed it over with another fake, patronizing smile. "Oh, Daniel, you're overthinking this. Let's not turn this into some big legal battle." I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the pool, the signs, the crowded pool deck, and most importantly, Karen standing proudly next to her crime. "Oh, I'm not turning this into a legal battle," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "You did that all on your own." Her smile faltered. For the first time, she looked concerned. She tried to cover it up, letting out another dismissive laugh. "Daniel, be reasonable. You weren't using the land, and this benefits everyone. If we just work together, I'm sure we can—" I cut her off. "Karen, you built an HOA-funded paid access pool on land you don't own. That's fraud. That's trespassing. That's theft." Her entire posture stiffened, the color drained from her face. I don't think it's necessary to use such strong language." "Oh, we're just getting started," I said, my voice calm and deadly. "You have no idea how much trouble you're in." And from the look on her face, she finally realized it too. Karen's smile had officially vanished. She knew she had screwed up. For a few seconds, She just stood there, fingers twitching around the condensation-covered lemonade glass in her hand. The confident, smug HOA president who had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood was gone. But Karen being Karen, she wasn't going to back down that easily. She took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and folded her arms like she still had some power in this situation. "Daniel," she started in that condescending voice, "I really think you're overreacting here. This isn't a legal issue, it's just a misunderstanding between neighbors." I barked out a laugh. "A misunderstanding?" I gestured toward the fully constructed HOA-branded pool sitting on my land. "Karen, you poured thousands of dollars into illegally building a pool on my property, started charging for access, and never got a single permit." She visibly flinched at the last part. "Oh," I continued, stepping forward, "and just so we're on the same page, you do realize that charging people to use land you don't own is fraud, right?" Karen blanched. For a moment, I thought she might actually admit defeat, but then she did what every cornered HOA Karen does. She doubled down. She put on her best stern president face, squared her shoulders, and pointed a manicured finger at me. "Listen, Daniel," she said through clenched teeth, "I don't think you understand how much effort the HOA has put into this project. We've already spent a significant amount of money on the pool, and I'm not about to let you destroy something that benefits the entire community over some technicality." My eyebrow twitched. She really thought this was just a technicality. "Let me make this clear, Karen," I said, stepping closer so she couldn't escape. "If this pool isn't gone in 24 hours, I'll be contacting the county, the zoning commission, the police, and every single lawyer I know." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "You wouldn't dare!" I smirked. "Karen, I'm a lawyer. Try me." That's when she cracked. The composure snapped like a dry twig. Her face turned a deep shade of red. Her hands balled into fists, and she actually stomped her foot. "Daniel, you are being completely unreasonable. You can't just threaten the HOA over this. We did this for you, for the neighborhood." "Oh, so I should be grateful?" I let out a low chuckle. "Karen, you're stealing my land and you expect me to just be okay with it? Why can't you just sell the land to the HOA? We'll pay you for it," she snapped. I let out a slow, deep breath. "Karen!" "What?" she huffed. I smiled, a slow, deliberate, infuriating smile. "I'm not selling you anything." Her nostrils flared. "Fine," she suddenly shrieked, whipping out her phone. "If you want to play dirty, then so can I. Let's see what our HOA lawyer has to say about this." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, please, call him." She blinked. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to call her bluff. She hesitated for just a second too long before hurriedly dialing a number. She turned away from me, pressing the phone to her ear. "Yes, hi, it's Karen. We have a situation. I need you to come down here immediately." I could hear the muffled voice on the other end. It sounded annoyed. Karen's fingers tapped furiously against her clipboard as she turned back toward me. "He'll be here soon," she snapped. "Then we'll see what the law has to say about this." I grinned. "Oh, I already know exactly what the law has to say, Karen, but go ahead. Call in your guy. This is going to be fun." Karen stood stiffly by the pool, gripping her clipboard like it was a lifeline, waiting for her lawyer to arrive. I waited too, not because I was worried. I was enjoying this. The HOA residents had started to take notice of the tension. A few of them, likely the ones who had paid for expensive pool passes, were beginning to murmur amongst themselves. I caught snippets of their conversation. "Wait, she didn't get permits for this? This isn't actually HOA property? Does that mean we've been paying for nothing?" Karen must have heard them too, because she suddenly turned toward the parking lot, eyes lighting up in relief as a silver Lexus pulled up. A man in an ill-fitting suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, looking about as enthusiastic as a DMV employee on overtime. This was Karen's big gun. I almost felt bad for her. Karen practically sprinted toward him. "Oh, thank God you're here, Mark," she whispered frantically, pulling him aside. I watched as she talked rapidly, gesturing toward me, toward the pool, toward the HOA members who were starting to look concerned. Mark sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. He already looked exhausted. Then finally he stepped toward me. "Mr. Crawford, is it?" he said, extending a hand. I shook it. "That's me." He sighed again. "Karen tells me there's a dispute over this land. She believes it's part of HOA jurisdiction." I smirked.
Does she? Karen visibly tensed. Mark turned toward her. Karen, you do have the deed showing the HOA owns this property, correct?
Silence. Karen suddenly looked very interested in her clipboard. Karen, Mark repeated, sharper this time. Where's the deed? She swallowed hard. Well, we assumed that since it borders the HOA park, we had the right to... Mark's face visibly paled. He turned back to me. You own this land, don't you? I pulled out my property deed, which I had kept in my truck for situations exactly like this. I unfolded it, holding it up between us. Here's my deed, I said. Here's the county map showing the property line. Here's my documentation proving that the HOA has never had any legal claim to this land. Mark took one look at the papers and let out the deepest sigh I had ever heard. Karen, he muttered, rubbing his temples again. What the hell did you do? Karen sputtered. I was told this land was open for community expansion. I was acting in the best interest of the HOA. Mark turned back toward me, looking utterly defeated. Okay, look, he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. What do you want? I raised an eyebrow. What do I want? I stepped forward, voice calm and controlled. I want this entire pool removed. I want every single piece of HOA property off my land. And I want full refunds issued to every resident who paid for HOA pool passes under false pretenses. Mark exhaled. Okay, we can negotiate the refunds. No, I cut in smoothly. There's no negotiation. He hesitated. I could tell he was already doing the mental math, how much this was going to cost, how deep the HOA had just buried itself. Karen, however, wasn't done fighting. This is absolutely ridiculous, she suddenly snapped. You can't just demand the destruction of a public amenity. I turned to her, smiling. Karen, it's not public. It's mine. She physically twitched, and then, in a last desperate move, she played what she thought was her ace card. Well then, fine, she spat. If you're going to be difficult, I'll take this to court. The HOA has resources. You'll be buried in legal fees before you even get a hearing. That was the moment I knew she was truly desperate, because I'm a lawyer. I grinned. Karen, please, take me to court. She blinked. What? I took a slow step forward. I would love to see you try and argue in front of a judge that you, a private HOA, illegally built a pool on someone else's land, charged residents for access, and never got a single permit. Karen's breath hitched. I leaned in just a little. Please, Karen, make my day. She stood there, frozen, her entire world crashing down around her. Mark, on the other hand, had completely given up. We're not taking this to court, he muttered. Then, turning to Karen, and you are going to fix this mess right now. Karen clenched her jaw, trembling with fury. But she knew she had lost. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spat out, Fine. I crossed my arms. Fine what? She swallowed. Fine, we'll tear everything down. The HOA members behind her looked shocked. Some of them even looked relieved. Mark turned back to me, exhausted. Happy now? I smirked. Oh, we're just getting started. Because Karen had just admitted fault in front of witnesses, and that meant I could go after the HOA for everything. Karen's face was still burning red from her humiliating admission, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook just yet. Mark, the HOA's so-called lawyer, looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. He exhaled sharply, adjusting his tie, then turned toward me. All right, Daniel, he muttered. You got what you wanted. We'll remove the pool. Just let's settle this quietly. I tilted my head. Quietly? Mark shot a warning glance at Karen, who was still glaring at me like a furious toddler who had just lost her favorite toy. He lowered his voice. Yes, no lawsuits, no press, no county involvement. We'll take care of it internally. I laughed. Mark, you seem like a reasonable guy, so let me explain this clearly. I held up my fingers, ticking off the list. You built on my land without permission. You charged people for access. You never got permits. You sold fraudulent memberships. I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only Mark and Karen could hear. If I wanted to, I could have the county here by the end of the day. And when they see an illegally constructed pool without permits, they'll slap the HOA with so many fines your grandkids will still be paying them off. Karen visibly swallowed. I turned toward the growing crowd of HOA members who were still murmuring among themselves. And then there's you guys, I said, addressing the homeowners. If you're feeling cheated by the fake pool memberships you paid for, I highly recommend filing a complaint, maybe even a class action lawsuit. I bet you'd all love to know where your money actually went. Karen's eyes widened in pure horror. A ripple of anger went through the HOA members. He's right, someone muttered. I want my money back, another chimed in. We should vote her out, someone else suggested. Karen whipped around, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Wait, let's not be hasty here. No, Karen, I cut in smoothly. Let's. Mark rubbed his face, clearly over this entire disaster. Look, Daniel, what do you actually want? I turned back to the pool. It was a nice pool. Deep blue water, a modern deck, good seating, professionally built, even if it was built illegally. And now that Karen was out of the picture, it was sitting on my land, completely paid for by the HOA. I wasn't about to let a perfectly good pool go to waste. The pool stays! A few HOA members gasped. Mark blinked. Wait, what? I folded my arms. You heard me. The HOA already paid for it, it's built, and honestly, it's not bad. But here's the deal. I pointed to the sign near the entrance, the one that had been advertising pool passes for HOA members only. That sign comes down. No more HOA exclusivity. No more membership fees. The HOA no longer owns or controls this pool. It's mine now. The neighborhood can still use it, but under my rules. Karen is permanently banned. I looked around at the gathered crowd, making sure everyone understood. This pool is now a private pool, which means the HOA has zero say in how I run it. But since most of you got screwed over by Karen, I'm willing to be a little generous. If you live in the neighborhood, you can still swim here, for free. A wave of murmurs rippled through the HOA members. Wait, so we don't have to pay for pool passes anymore? Someone asked. Nope, I said, grinning. Karen scammed you. You've paid enough. A few people started clapping. One guy in the back laughed. Oh, this is amazing. The HOA paid for it, but now Daniel owns it. A woman nodded approvingly. Honestly, this is way better than what Karen had planned. Then someone asked the big question. What about Karen? Can she still use the pool? I grinned. Oh, absolutely not. There was a pause, and then applause. Karen, who had been hovering nearby, watching in shock and horror, let out an audible gasp. You can't do that, she shrieked, storming back toward me. You're being just as bad as... I held up a hand. Karen, let me be very clear. I pointed to my land deed. This is my property. I pointed to the pool. This is my pool. Then I pointed to her. And you are banned. Karen's face turned purple. This is harassment, she spat. You can't just... Actually, Mark, the HOA lawyer, cut her off, looking more than a little amused now. He absolutely can. Karen's mouth fell open. She whipped around to the remaining HOA board members. Are you seriously going to let him do this? Margaret, the HOA treasurer, smirked. Karen, dear, you built the pool on his land. It's his now. And honestly, this is the best possible outcome. Karen looked like she was about to explode. You'll regret this, she hissed at me. I just smiled. Enjoy the view, Karen, from outside the fence. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Karen fuming as the neighborhood officially celebrated the death of her dictatorship. The HOA was still there. The pool was still here. But Karen, she was finally, officially powerless. And my summer? It was about to get a whole lot more relaxing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever had a wild HOA experience, we'd love to hear about it. See you in the next one.